Alright, now for the X belt, same thing as the Y. Trim off the end so that you're flat against the tooth. And then measure a belt length of 42 5/16. Off one more tooth. And you go through the same process of slipping that into the belt clip. The belt clip is closest to the rods. Again, no gap. So now as you place this over, make sure that one of the set screws is lined up with the flat. This will be a tight fit. And you don't need to push this all the way down, but I am going to push it down so that I can adjust where the flat goes. And I'm going to raise this back up to just where the set screws start to come in at the top. So you can barely see the top of the set screw there. And this is to get these two belts in the same plane. And we'll show more on that when we mount the carriage here to make sure that those belts are level. So there might be a little bit more adjustment on this. Now as you're running the belt back and forth, you want to make sure that you don't feel any vibration of the belt teeth on the pulley coming back and forth. If there is, you can flip the belt over to the other side to get rid of a bias in the belt. So you can do that on both the X and the Y. So on the X, same thing. We don't have any bias in the belt. There's no catch of the teeth on the pulleys, so these pulleys are now riding smooth. So do watch out for that, and you can flip the belt over, reattach it, same procedure as what we went through before. The next step will be putting on the bed carriage. Some features to note is the large cutout goes to the front as that fits around the bearing bracket. The mounting holes for the belt clip always go to the right. That way your bed does not go backwards based on the drive motor. We have the feature cut out here for the skip sense encoder board for Y, if that system is being installed on your printer. And then we have the bed heater cable clearance on the left side. You will also need your 4 bearing clips, which just pop onto the bearings. You do not want to push them on without having some pressure on the bottom of the bearing to make sure you don't bend your rods. And make sure that in the orientation they're in, there's no clicking of the bearings. If there is any clicking, you can rotate the bearing about 15 degrees, and it should put one of the tracks on the edges and take out any of that clicking. So that runs a lot smoother now. Line up your carriage plate Now when you first put the M3 bolts in on these, you do not want to tighten them down. These bearing holders are self-aligning, so you can use high tolerance bearings and not have any issues with binding. So I'll get those started. The only ones that you want to tighten down at this point are the belt clip bolts. You just want these to be just slightly loose for now. And then run make sure that the bed does clear the top of that if it does hit, that mount is slightly tilted up. You just have to undo the bolts here, push it down, tighten them back up again. That clears. And just make sure that the bearings line up straight with no binding, and then tighten them down. Now your bed and your bearings should be aligned, flat, and should glide nicely. In the next step, we're going to put on the limit switches for Z and Y, and those are mounted on like this with the limit switch in between, and then the M3 bolts. To make it easier to do, we're going to just pre-thread the M3 bolt into the bracket and do that to all of the brackets, and then put on the limit switch. You do want to be careful not to tighten that down too much because the leads are on this side of the PCB board, and you don't want to cut through to the leads. You can put a fiber washer under there, which I will sometimes do, but hand tightening works very well. Just to snug it down so that it is not wiggling on the mount. You can then have that pretty much flush here, and then tighten up the back bolt to keep that from rotating around. So once tightened down and snug so it's not moving, then just pop in the limit switch cable, which will then plug into the main board in this first port here. And we will do that later when we show the video on cable management. So right now that's just where it goes, is Z, Y, and then the X. We now do the same thing on the Y, where I've pre-threaded put the bolts in, and again just be careful to snug them. You do not have to over tighten them. And then tighten them by hand. Then you can rotate it upside down, tighten the bottom mounting bolt, back it off just enough that you can move this and then move it into place. Pop in the cable, which is going to plug into the second limit switch port over, which we'll cover in more detail later.